We would like to move on to the panel discussion now. The theme is towards a hydrogen society, the present challenges and future vision. We would like to have the panelists to come up to the stage. Please give them a warm round of applause. I would like to hand over to the moderator, Senior Fellow, Member, Board of Directors, International Environment Institute, as well as specially appointed Professor of Tohoku University, co-founder and co-president of U3 Innovations LLC, Professor Sumiko Takeuchi. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. As I was introduced, my name is Takeuchi. I am from the International Environment Institute as well as Tohoku University, researching on energy and climate change. And we would not be able to move the world just with policies. So I have been working together with the businesses in the area of environmental energy area to bring various startups to this environment. We are providing support to the startups after founding U3 Innovations LLC. So today, in the Sustainable Finance Week, we will be talking about hydrogen technology. In Japan, in 2017, the basic strategy for hydrogen had been set up for the first time in the world as a central government. And so the development of hydrogen and the implementation of it into the society had been worked on since then. In May, the promotion for the hydrogen society law had been established, and the natural gases and fossil fuels, the discrepancy in the prices of that with hydrogen would be filled in through subsidies. And I had been involved in this area of hydrogen and ammonia since the hydrogen, the strategy at the council, and I have been involved in the discussion of these matters for a long time, and there has been a lot of advancements. Now, the carbon neutrality is a clear target, and the attention towards hydrogen has been increased. However, we have to think about the rationale from the economic perspective. How can we go one step or two steps further for the implementation of hydrogen is what we have to think about, and that's why we are discussing this today in this panel discussion. From here, I would like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves one by one, what each company or organization is doing. But prior to that, well, there are people here who are finance experts, and you don't know much about hydrogen. So I myself, I would like to talk a little bit about hydrogen, and after that, there would be a presentation from the three panelists. CO2 reduction must be made for decarbonization goal. Now, we believe that electricity will be the key. In carbon neutrality, we have to work on a variety of things. But what is at the root? What would be the pillar? Will be the decarbonization of power sources and the electrification of the the demand. So I would like to make supplementary comments. What you're seeing at the very left is the overview of the energy structure currently. So you may think that the electricity is all of the energy, but it's about 30% of the total. The remaining 70% includes gasoline or the heavy oil, which are non-electricity, and that contributes to 70% of the energy. So if we are to reduce CO2 from this 70%, we need to make things more highly efficient. So if the gasoline becomes more efficient, the CO2 emission will be reduced. But the fuel efficiency will not happen overnight, and you would not be able to make the high efficiency to zero. So the boilers and the automotives, in order for it to become electrified and to make the electricity used in decarbonized fuel, that would be the main point. And what kind of role would hydrogen play? So there are things that electricity would be able to do, but there are areas electricity is not good at. And hydrogen will be supplementing that. Depending on how the hydrogen is made, there are many ways to generate hydrogen, but there are ways to generate hydrogen without emitting CO2. Sorry, this is a busy slide. I didn't know that this venue is so big. In May, the law on the promotion of the society, the Hydrogen Society, was enacted. But before that, I was invited as an expert to talk about it. And you talk about hydrogen so simply as hydrogen, but there are various perspectives to hydrogen, and this is the chart that I made to explain about that. I think that you would be able to see that on the website of the upper house. So if you are to generate hydrogen domestically, whether you would make it with renewable energy or nuclear energy, that's what you need to decide. And from the energy security perspective, this is very good, but there is limitation to the volume. And also, inclusive of renewable energy, the volume will be very limited, and also the cost for the generation would be quite high. That is problematic. So the hydrogen generated from renewable energy or from the fossil fuels overseas, if we are able to bring it in large volume, then that's the way to go. So that's the current status. So now I would like to ask the presenter to present. First, I would like to ask the Director and Senior Executive Officer of Iwatani Corporation, Mr. Fukushima, and he is also Secretary General of Japan Hydrogen Association. He will be talking about the hydrogen business.
My name is Fukushima. Thank you very much for having me. I'm here on behalf of Iwatani, and I'm also here as the Secretary General of the Hydrogen Value Chain Promotion Council. I was introduced, but let me introduce myself once again. This is myself. At the top, I said, this is the title I have at the moment. I used to be with METI, and I spent years at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. And to pick up my time at METI related to hydrogen, at the end, I was in charge of Director General of Technology for Policy Coordination and Product Safety. When you want to use hydrogen, you have to begin to use hydrogen at a place where hydrogen is not being used at that moment, and there is not well-developed regulation. For example, Mirai of Toyota, even when they wanted to establish hydrogen stations, we did not assume that hydrogen will be supplied in the city. So we had to make regulation and we had to make rules that were difficult to be covered in the high pressure act of the past. And I was previously in charge of the manufacturing sector, so that from that context, I began to be in charge of hydrogen, and I was in R&D when the Great East Japan earthquake occurred. And because nuclear power was suspended, we injected efforts into R&D on hydrogen. To add to what I've already said, here it says 2819, 1.03 billion tons emission from hydrogen. And here it says power and non-power. And for power, everything is brown, but for non-power, commercial, industry, and transport, these three sectors are indicated, but by 2030, we have to reduce this to 46%. That's the commitment of the government. So we will reduce commercial, industry, and transport, and rather than reducing power, we want to reduce emission by relying more on hydrogen and renewables. And finally, the target for 2050, plus minus zero. So in terms of energy mix, it will be more dependent on decarbonized fuels. And for the non-power sector, there is attention paid on hydrogen. Then, on hydrogen, why hydrogen? Of course, we're not doing hydrogen just because we want to promote hydrogen. As I said, for the commercial sector or for the industrial sector, we have to provide energy, and we have to provide energy, supply energy in a decarbonized manner, PV, solar, or wind. Has to be relied upon. And at the same time, power regulation or power adjustment. For solar, power cannot be generated without sunshine and without wind. For wind power generation, power cannot be generated. In the case of thermal power generation, there is balancing because when there is less supply, then more power is generated. And when there is glut of supply, then supply is reduced or suspended. But in the future, we have to close the thermal power plants. So hydrogen can be relied upon because of the advantage of possibility of storage and transportability. Of course, power can be transported, but hydrogen can be transported. And also, it's possible to make power out of hydrogen. It could be used as a heat source, and it could be used as the fuel for automotives. So part of hydrogen can be used for power, but for non-power sector, it could be used as a non-power decarbonized source. So that's why there's so much attention on hydrogen, and I hope that we can talk about these points.
Thank you very much. The next panelist is from ENEOS, Mr. Hideaki Tanaka, who is the Operating Officer, General Manager of Hydrogen Business Department. Please talk about the hydrogen business.
Thank you very much. I'm Tanaka from ENEOS General Hydrogen Business Department. I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity. I'd like to talk about initiatives that we're taking in terms of realizing the hydrogen society. The strategies and visions regarding hydrogen strategy, FCV hydrogen stations, supplying hydrogen is what we do. And toward 2050, we want to make this broader-based industrial society where hydrogen is used. 2050, toward the 2050 vision, there are three strategies. The first is building a hydrogen supply chain overseas to create the hydrogen and to bring this into the country. And basically, our companies' locations where their products to supply to the nearing industries, and also creating energy supply systems where energy is produced locally and used locally. We would like to supply to nearby factories. And next is hydrogen for transportation. And we operate a hydrogen station. From this hydrogen station to supply to commercial buses, to commercial vehicles to supply hydrogen is what we want to do. And I'd like to give examples of each. For the creation of a hydrogen supply chain overseas, we have to secure hydrogen sources. Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Australia, we are working on these countries in bringing in hydrogen. MCH is what we use as a carrier, and we want to bring this domestically to supply to nearby industries. And the domestic bases would be Mizushima, where we have products, Kawasaki. These are locations which we are studying. In Kawasaki coastal areas, in the surrounding areas, there's a lot of industrial consumers, and there's an area with high potential, and we're focusing on this. For example, Haneda Airport. From Haneda across Tamagawa River, on the other side, we have a Kawasaki refinery, and from Kawasaki refinery, use the hydrogen pipeline to supply hydrogen to Haneda Airport. We provide this to airport building and airport equipment companies to heat and electricity and GSC vehicles. These are what we like to supply hydrogen for. And with regard to liquefied hydrogen acceptance, Japan Hydrogen Energy, Iwatani, and with Kawasaki, we're working on this. And the second is a locally produced and locally consumed model. And this is an example of Hokkaido. Renewable energy resources on a large scale would be leveraged. And we have a supply from Hokkaido Electrical Power Company, and we supply this to Idemitsu. That is the business. And the third strategy is the hydrogen station network. And presently, we have 150 hydrogen stations within the countries, and 35 locations are being managed by our company. And the recently opened one, what was opened this March, was Tokyo Harumi Hydrogen Station. And this is for commercial vehicles such as buses, FCVs, FC buses. We can supply hydrogen to these. And also we can supply to towns, nearby towns. This is the first model of its kind on the domestic scene. And with regard to Woven City, this is run by Woven Project, and we will construct a hydrogen station. That is all by way of introduction from me. Thank you.
So last but not least is Mr. Suzuki from Advantage Partners. Mr. Suzuki is a partner of the Advantage Partners in the responsible for renewables and sustainability. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in front of you today. I would like to talk a little bit about my company, Advantage Partners, which is a private equity fund. I am a partner there, and I am in charge of the renewable energy as well as sustainability. So I am in charge of the investment in the area of climate. Before joining Advantage Partners, I was working for 29 years in Mitsubishi Corporation, and 1/3 of that time has been spent in the large-scale infrastructure projects, especially in Europe and Middle East. The offshore wind, which is in large scale, as well as a solar solar farm and battery storage business, or the CCGT combined cycle, the thermal power plant, or the desalination plants. So those are the areas where I had worked in at Mitsubishi Corporation. You may not have heard of Advantage Partners, and this is the first private equity fund in Japan. It was founded in 1992, and the buyout business. So it has a track record of various buyouts in Japan and 130 billion yen under management as the seventh fund. So in Asia, in Southeast Asia, as well as Greater China and India, those the $60 million of the second fund is being invested. And also there is a vehicle to invest in listed companies, the Growth Support Fund. So my team has been established 3 years ago, relatively new. It's a multinational investment in Europe, US, as well as Australia. And we also conduct the project investment and not only in the corporate investment. So that's our team. Mr. Fukushima mentioned a little bit about this earlier. The Japan Hydrogen Association. This is the biggest association, a private association in Japan. And the hydrogen fund, which had been created by the association, which focuses on hydrogen supply chain, had been established. So we manage the hydrogen fund. We are consigned from Japan Hydrogen Association for the management of this fund, and we are involved in the investment related areas for this fund. The fund itself is run by the members of the Hydrogen Association as well as other investors. So it's completely private sector fund, and the size is relatively small still, but it aims to increase in size for the decarbonization of the Japanese society. So where would the fund be investing in? The investment will be done globally. The aim is the global supply chain, and the usage will be in Japan, in the steel industry or in the chemical industry, the industrial hydrogen use, as well as in the mobility, SAF fuel, the maritime related fuel. Well, earlier there was the presentation from MOL, and also the fuel for the large trucks, and also the hydrogen and ammonia for co-firing purposes. The hydrogen generation plants is the target of the investment, both domestic and abroad. At the end of August, first closing was completed. So the fund has been established and the activity, the investment will start. And the 8 companies that you see here are the investors who have committed, and so $410 million have been committed, and the fund has started its investment activities. So this is a hard-to-abate sector, and we want to collaborate not only with the stakeholders in Japan, but also the stakeholders from overseas to make this fruitful. Thank you very much, Mr. Suzuki. So from here on, we would like to go into specific contents. So the initiatives for the realization of hydrogen society, Fukushima-san and Tanaka-san, I would like to ask you questions. So there are various challenges in the utilization of hydrogen still. I think there are 3 or 4 challenges. One is cost. How do we reduce the cost of hydrogen? That is the biggest challenge. So 100 yen per normal cubic meters. And so in 2050, it should be around 20 yen or so. So the initiatives to get there. So what are the potentials that are you feeling? The second point is the securing of the volume of hydrogen 2030 in the hydrogen strategy, which was revised in 2023 in June. So there will be a target of 12 million tons. And I was wondering if it's possible. The third is something that has not been discussed yet. So if there is anything related to safety, related to the technology of hydrogen, so is there anything that you are concerned about? So if you could talk about that, I would appreciate it. So I said 3 or 4 points I said earlier. But so the hydrogen technology, is this something that can be sold to the international market? That's one of the things that I would like to ask you. And maybe I can ask Mr. Suzuki about this from the perspective of investment. Where is the strength of the Japanese technology with this regards? So first, I would like to have the discussion on those matters for the realization of hydrogen society. What is your take on these matters?
Could we have the slide up once again? Thank you very much. At the moment, as was introduced, in the previous slide, I showed you the reason why hydrogen, and I explained the reasons why. And so, based upon that presumption, what are the challenges? If I talk about JH2A, Japan Hydrogen Association, these 3 are the challenges. And that's the reason why we established the association. In terms of cost, as I said, 1 normal cubic meter, 100 yen, and reduced to 30 by 2030, and 20 yen by 2050. Those are the government targets. And in order to reduce cost, what's most important is, number 1, increase the volume. If volume is increased, then naturally cost will be significantly reduced. And at the moment, for Japan in general, 2 million tons of hydrogen is being produced, so they say. But what's sold? It's only or less than 20,000 tons. So 99% is self-consumption. So it's only 20,000 tons that's sold. By 2030, plus 1 million tons, and then by 2040, 12 million tons. So enormous amount of hydrogen will have to be produced, or conversely speaking, if that volume can be produced, expense or cost can be reduced quite significantly. Who are the potential buyers? That's what number 1 is all about. It's not included, but we have 450 member companies at the moment, producers, transporters, users, including financial institutions, Many stockholders have to feel the advantages. Of course, no CO2 emission is one advantage, but we want to offer other advantages so that it becomes an attractive fuel. So number one and number two, and we have the Commercialization Committee, Regulatory Committee, and these committees are in charge of objective number one and number two. So what kind of projects can be launched? That's one thing they are discussing, and it's also related to safety, but the regulatory committee is discussing that. JR East has begun the Hibari project to develop carriages that use storage battery, but it's difficult to use that for the actual rolling stock. That's because there's no regulation at the moment, and there has not been any verification of the safety aspect. So if we want hydrogen to be used for diverse purposes, safety verification has to be done, and the same, if we apply the same regulation as hydrogen that was used in production lines, then we cannot use hydrogen for diverse purposes. So data has to be collected to confirm the safety and then promote use. But demand has to be promoted and costs have to be reduced on the major presumption of safety. So I said 450 members have signed up, and those are some of the efforts that they are making.
Thank you very much. So in reducing the cost, the demand must be generated. So implementing it into the society would require that. So I would like to ask Mr. Tanaka. So ENEOS is an oil company for the fossil fuel major. And you are focusing on hydrogen. And why have you focused on hydrogen? What is your strength? I think you talked about this in your presentation, but I think your strength is to be able to use the infrastructure that's already existing. So how do you see your strength? In what was lacking from the presentation was that I was able to see what you were doing overseas domestic, and what is the ratio?
Tanaka from ENEOS. The reason why we're doing the hydrogen business, we deal with fossil fuels, oil products, and we have been for a long time supplying this. As an extension of this, our objective is a stable supply of energy. We think that's our mission. And going forward, hydrogen, if that's an energy source with high potential, we want to focus on that and we want to supply that. And that is what we think. And the reason and the advantage that we have in focusing on hydrogen is, as you have said, we have existing infrastructure which we can use and leverage. Our company, as a carrier, is focusing on NCH, and there's a reason. Therein lies the reason there. NCH is one of the oil products that we supply. NCH may not be a term that's familiar to you, and here is a correction ink pen. Correction ink pen. And inside the correction ink is such that 60% is ingredient of MCH, and we have been dealing in this for a long time. And this can be used as a hydrogen carrier. And in order, the vessels that we use for oil products and tanks, such infrastructure can be used for hydrogen. And that is why we're focusing on hydrogen using MCH. And that is the major reason. And also, for at each base, how many tons of hydrogen do we have? Producing hydrogen overseas and carrying this onto the domestic scene. Per base, 50,000 tons is what we're looking at. So one location, 50,000 tons, and 3 locations would provide 150,000 tons toward the government goal of 12 million tons. We're far off from that, but cost is very high, and we're having support provided, but we want to increase the volume. And to do this, I believe it's important to reduce cost. May I mention another point? Reduction of cost is one point, but the price is going up is also very important. What is being considered now? Carbon pricing. Through carbon pricing, if the overall level is brought up, that's very important. On the consumer side of hydrogen, there has to be an incentive, a mechanism with incentives. There has been added value of hydrogen, so we need to introduce a mechanism with incentives for steel, green steel, for chemicals, green chemicals. If the supply cost would be such that where it's acceptable to the consumers, consumer project, hydrogen projects would be implemented even without subsidies. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. You pointed out on a very good point. So the cost reduction is the key, and what's difficult is the green steel and the regular steel. It's the same steel, and there's no difference in the performance, but one was made in a green manner, and it costs 1.2, 1.3 times more, and would the customers buy it? So the carbon pricing would fill in the gap, and Japan would consider introducing the carbon pricing, and there would be introduction of that, and that was discussed under Kishida administration in its GX promotion committee. So I would like to ask you one point. The hydrogen project overseas, you said that it's 50,000 tons, so 2040 12 million tons. So you would need to about 240 the projects in order to fulfill this. And what is the kind of speed that you would need? So in countries like South Korea, they use a lot of nuclear energy, and they would not be able to fulfill everything by renewable energy domestically, and they would be using the hydrogen from overseas. So you would need to secure the volume at early point in order to win the competition for the hydrogen overseas. So how is Japanese companies doing on that?
With regard to our company, we have a lot of bases that we're studying overseas, and we need to expand that, further expand that. That is how we feel. On the other hand, the framework for support is 3 trillion yen. It's a large framework. The hydrogen which can be supplied with that framework needs to be calculated. And project development is such that it's very labor intensive. You need a lot of people. To how many people we can gather who can undertake this project, to what extent we can get enough people is another factor, I think.
Thank you very much for your input. In April of this year, I went to Australia. From the Australian perspective, so they want to sell hydrogen to Japan. I was asked many questions from Australian people, and what I have responded is as follows. Japan is requiring hydrogen from overseas, and they would be needing to buy it from overseas, but it needs to be cheaper. And so in US, there is IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and they are suppressing the price of hydrogen, and that can be covering the exports to Japan. And South America has a lot of potential of hydrogen, and they're trying to sell it cheaply. And I asked the Australian that needs to reduce the price of hydrogen. I think there should be negotiations. You need resources to do that. So thank you very much for your response. So we discussed about cost, how to reduce the cost of hydrogen, and how the society would be bearing the burden of that cost. So at this point in time, the cost tends to be a challenge for the introduction of hydrogen, but how we would be able to implement this important technology into the society. In that perspective, finance will be playing a lot of role in that. So thank you for waiting, Suzuki-san. So in introducing the hydrogen, how would you be providing financing? Who would be taking the risk? How? Could you talk a little bit about that? Could you give us your take? Thank you for the question. Our fund basically is the investment in equity. So financing is about providing investment to equity and debt. And who would be the risk taker will be the very critical. And we would like to provide funding there. So after providing the funding, we need certain level of return, and we need to prove that return in order to bring on board the institutional investors. Sustainable financing must have sustainable financing in order to have it last until 2050. In Europe, they have regulations. For example, the airline companies, they need to use SAF to a certain percent by 2030. In the maritime world, the same kind of regulation applies. And in the US, they utilize IRA, providing incentives. And in Japan, there is no clear guideline yet. In the past, I had been working in the renewable energy area, including offshore wind, and the solar panel had reduced its pricing in a decade, and a megawatt €200 was the subsidy when I was working on it, and now there's no subsidy anymore because there's a lot of financing coming in, and the funds play a lot of role there. In US and Europe, there are mega funds handling 1 billion and tens of billions of dollars, and they provide a lot of funding. And what happens is that the capacity will be increased, and when the capacity is increased, the manufacturers will increase their plants, and they would make electrolysis plants, and the cost will decline, and when the costs come down, the demand will go up. So the financing will play a very critical role for upscaling. Financing must be utilized, and there needs to be investors involved. And when there is certain level of return, it would incentivize the people to invest more. And through that, we would be able to realize the carbon neutrality by 2050. Thank you very much. A certain level of return is necessary, is what you have said. So that's a condition. So the fund must provide returns to the investors. Under that environment, the hydrogen is still very difficult to handle. However, there are various kinds of hydrogen, and there are some feasible methodology like usage of ammonia. So hydrogen is something that's for the future society. So as a private fund, how would you be working on that? So there are many use cases for hydrogen. When you look globally, the SAF world is where you would be able to eye on a fast growth because in the UK there is a regulation for the usage of that, and you would need to buy SAF if you are BA because you are obligated to use it. So you would be able to have a FID more easily from the off-taking perspective. The certain level of return. Well, in Europe, the interest rate level is high. So no one would be invested. No one will invest it unless it's higher than the buying of the government bonds. So it needs to have certain level of premium. And in the case of the U.S., the regulation under IRA, especially in 45B, which relates to hydrogen, it's still in wait-and-see mode until it's more concrete. So people will be eyeing on the use case. So there's one FID in Sweden about the green steel, and the European automotive manufacturers would use this green steel. So not everything will be promoted in one go, but where it's profitable, people will start from there. So investment will be made in those areas first, and the Japanese off-takers, if they can buy it, that will be great. And by having the Japanese financiers, there would be a return of knowledge to the Japanese market. Thank you very much. So in addition to that, I would like to ask, so you are in the capacity of a fund, and I think that you have taken a look at various hydrogen companies. So I would like to know what you view is the strength of the Japanese companies. So you need to earn money from overseas by selling the technology in order to make the society grow. So what is your take on that? So I had been to overseas market, and there is a lot of demand for the Japanese technology, especially the electrolysis system. The overseas companies are very good at the electrolysis system, but if you look one by components, there are many Japanese technologies used. Not only in the electrolysis system, but if you are making the SAF, there is a process called Fischer-Tropsch, and the reactor is provided from Japan, and also the transformer stations. So the Japanese manufacturers are involved in that, and the Japanese technology is solicited, and so we need to make more efforts to sell those technologies. So thank you very much for your encouraging comments. I have gone to various sites, and the Japanese technologies are used in various parts. So integration, operation. The Japanese companies may not be so big, but their components are included in those integrated systems. So in Hekinan, a thermal power plant of JERA is where I visited recently, and I have seen the ammonia co-firing plant. And what interested me was that there are many visits paid from the foreign players, and the person in charge of the site visits were very tired because so many people had visited their plant. And it would be very good if that happens more and more. So I agree. So the systems, EPCs, inclusive of the financing, if the Japanese players could be involved in the bigger areas, that would be better, rather than just providing the one component of the system in order to be dominant player in the world. But that's what the fund would be working on, as well as what the Hydrogen Council will be working on. So as the council, it is working to work as one team to sell the hydrogen technology from Japan. So from the perspective of the financing, there is a limitation in the risk in which the private sector would be able to take a loan. So how the cooperation between private and public sector can be made. And Tanaka-san from ENEOS have given a lot of examples. And I think there were a lot of projects related to Tokyo metropolitan government. And I was wondering what kind of support from the local governments you are soliciting. So Fukushima-san first.
First of all, as an overall framework, support and regulation, it doesn't have to be hydrogen, but to impose obligation towards zero emission, that balance is necessary. IRL included, there's much support on the side of the United States, while Europe is tilted towards regulation. So what about Japan? What's Japan going to do? In order to reduce the total cost, what needs to be done? Through zero emission, promotion of hydrogen has to be done. So we need to strike a balance. There has to be that overall framework. That's one thing. And then secondly, each technology, elemental technology, Japan has strong technology, but unfortunately for PV or wind or storage batteries, there's technology in Japan. We came up with the final product, but in the end, we lost the competition to other countries. That phenomenon has happened in the past and is happening. So how can we avoid repeating the same mistake in hydrogen? So there's the Act to Promote Hydrogen Society, which was enacted by the government. So there has been progress. And under the leadership of the governor, Tokyo Metropolitan Government has offered subsidies for hydrogen stations, and other support initiatives are being done by TMG. So there's the national government doing many things, and then there are regional efforts by local governments by tapping on their characteristics to promote the use of hydrogen. So different stakeholders should bring about their wisdom. There is a finite fiscal resources. So in the end, we want the Japanese private sector, the industry, to be strengthened. And I think towards that goal, we should work towards that goal.
How about you, Tanaka-san? Fukushima-san has almost covered all, so I'd like to just raise one point. This year in March, our company's Harumi Station opened, and I mentioned that earlier. And Governor Koike honored us with her presence. She gave a message in the opening ceremony, not only in terms of resources, but that kind of support is what we're receiving. That is all I wanted to add.
Thank you very much. The field of energy is very close to the economy as well as people's lives. So not only the national government, but also the local governments as well as the private sectors should work to support this area. So that will be a critical step. So we have about 3 to 4 minutes left. And if there is any question from the floor, maybe 1 or 2 questions can be taken before we close. Anyone with a question? Could you raise your hand, please, if you have any question? So please.
Shinohara Sawate. You raise SAF. I heard that there's no company to produce SAF in Japan, so we have to end up importing SAF. Why can't we produce SAF in Japan? What's the reason? To whom are you addressing your question? Anyone who would like to answer. Tanaka-san.
Our company's size is small. In Wakayama refinery, we're proceeding with the SAF project to produce overseas, and bringing it to Japan is more rational. But we have not given up on producing in the country, and so we'll continue to pursue SAF production. Is it expensive to produce domestically? It's not necessarily the case. Of course, recent inflation impacts and various things, costs have gone up. And because we're proceeding with different projects, the contractors' demand-supply balance leads to increasing cost. There are these circumstances, but when all of this levels out, I think things will change. And SAF is such that once launched, how much the raw materials are and how much we can sell, that's the question. SAF is such that the ingredients cost is very low. It's the prices are going up, so it's hard to prospect into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the question was about SAF. Can it be manufactured in Japan? So there was a supplementary comment on that point. So Mr. Tanaka responded to that question. Thank you very much. So there are so many other things that we would like to make, but we only have 1 minute, so I would like to close. We talked for about 1 hour to talk about the hydrogen society. But the usage of hydrogen is not the objective. It is about the creation of sustainable society and Japan to be able to grow economically so that it becomes a country of happiness. So the cost must be reduced. If the energy cost is high, the economic growth cannot be foreseen. So by using these hydrogen, we should bring down the cost, and the private sector financing should be provided to these initiatives. There are various types of technologies related to hydrogen, and optimal methodology should be used, and the hydrogen society should be created through those efforts. Japan will become a sustainable society through the support of the financing towards hydrogen, and I hope that this kind of discussion should be further promoted with this Finance Week as a turning point. So please give a warm round of applause to the 3 panelists. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Please give the panelists a warm round of applause.